Okay, dokie. Let's start talking. I was gonna reference this, but yeah. Alright. In 3, 2, 1. What's good? It's your girl Bianca, and welcome back to yet another episode of Are You Alone? But what I'm actually asking you is, are you achieving life on natural euphoria? So for those of you who are new here, welcome. And for those of you who have been here the entire journey, thank you so much for just your unconditional love and support and just your belief in me throughout this whole new path of mine. So I am very excited to be back. It has been quite a while. For those of you who keep up with me on my personal Instagram at BiancaK_16 and on the Are You Alone podcast at AYA_podcast, then you would know that I had taken a small break from releasing new episodes. That's just because I wanted to, one, stay present with my family and my friends during this holiday season. Plus, I was busy running around and trying to put this whole setup together. So I just want to give a quick shout out to my family members who had helped me with all of this, who helped me put some of this stuff together, who were able to give me some of the equipment for Christmas and really just make this whole thing come to life. So I'm very grateful for you, very thankful, and thankful for all of you who were patient enough, because I know a lot of people have been wanting this. And if you are just listening and you're not watching, then now you know that I have a YouTube channel with my podcast. So, it's just another platform for me to get to know my supporters, my listeners, once again, those who just believe in me. And I've actually had quite a bit of people ask me if I was going to do YouTube, and that was always in the vision. But since all of this was very new to me, I didn't want to rush anything or not provide quality, because this podcast does mean a lot to me, and you just got to take things at your own pace. So we're finally here. You can now watch me speak instead of just listening, so you have your options. But I'm just going to kind of dive in from where we left off a few weeks back. And if you haven't listened to any of the previous episodes, I will link all of that in the description box below. My podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor, and then plenty more. So be sure to look for that down below. So yeah, let's just get started. For those of you who are new here, I do summarize my previous episodes. So for the last episode, I had talked about how we could start to view our brain as a muscle and compare our habitual thought process to muscle memory, and how sometimes we can fall into these bad habits and these routines that we're psychologically not even aware of, and they actually restrict us from any progressive change. So for an example, if you talk negatively to yourself, sometimes you don't even recognize you're doing that, and you don't recognize that you're actually putting yourself down too. So if you have yet to listen to that, then I highly encourage you to do so. I released that one right before New Year's, just because I know as we go into the new year, it feels like a fresh start, and that we can kind of better ourselves moving forward. So with that though, I hope you guys all had a great holiday season. You were able to spend it with your loved ones. For those of you who don't celebrate holidays, then I hope that you were just around, people with good energy, good vibes, and who brought you happiness. And that just this new year has been off to a good start. Although I know it's a little rough right now, at least in the States. So other than that, I hope maybe that this new year has brought new opportunities for many, and that it's been productive. I know that mine has really been productive with everything that's just been going on with moving forward with my podcast. But I had also recently just got into a car accident with my cousin. Thankfully, her and I and the other party, we were all okay. I'm not trying to put her on blast, but it was it was her fault, because she straight up just came from a side road and turned straight into my lane. But my Grand Theft Auto and Tokyo Drift video game mindset really kicked in, and I was like, I was like looking over to the right, and then I like swerved over to the right, and then I like came back into my lane. So I missed most of the impact, but she still nicked the back of my car, Miss Layla. So Miss Layla will be going into cosmetic surgery sometime this week. But you know, for those of you who are into like symbolism and can interpret what a car accident in the beginning of the year may be, let me know, because I'd be actually pretty interested in your analysis and your take on that. However, moving forward with today's episode, I will be talking about transparency and why I feel that it is important, why I think it opens lines of communication, and that's not only on like a grander, large scheme of things, but also on a smaller scale with individual relationships. So the reason I had decided to talk about transparency for this first video episode was just because I think when you can be more clear about your intentions with other people, you're able to kind of start the foundation of a, you know, solid relationship that is kind of built around trust and honesty. And so, especially for those of you who are now just kind of like tuning into my podcast, my biggest thing is to build a relationship with those who are my supporters and who are just following along. And that's why I, throughout this just process and throughout all of my episodes and future episodes, I will always try to be as transparent with all of you as much as possible. And, you know, as we move forward within this episode, I'm just going to talk about things on like a larger scale real quick. And it's kind of broad just because it has to deal with opinions. But really what I'm just trying to get at is everyone is obviously entitled to their own opinions. They can definitely express them, they can share them, but the division with that comes from forcing your opinion onto someone who may not believe the same thing. Now, you have to recognize that when we force these things onto other people, there's a defense that kind of comes up, and it blocks really the openness and the opportunity to have discussions about maybe their viewpoint. For me though, since I've recognized that, I do try to be very open when hearing other people's opinions. And so with a lot of the things that I have to say, I know people will agree or disagree. I'm open to hearing what you have to say, you know, help educate me and help me understand maybe your viewpoint. That way I can see multiple sides to the stories instead of just like one. And I just think that just helps me overall, which is like having a broader mindset of how certain things can go. So that's just like transparency on a grand scheme of things, especially because the discussions that I have within my podcast are thoughts of my own. And I just want to have a quick disclaimer as far as, you know, I'm not a professional anything. I'm not trying to tell people how to live their life, what they should do. Everything that I do say within my podcast is something that is just for your consideration. Other than that, you have the control over your life, your thoughts, and ultimately what you want to believe in and what you don't want to believe in. And so I just say this because, like I had said before, I just want to have open lines of communication. If there's something that I say that maybe you want to elaborate on and, you know, talk about, like, by all means, please do so. The only thing with me is that any negativity is something you can miss me with, because I just don't have the time and the energy to be spending on like negative comments, or, you know, we can have a discussion. There's a difference between that and then just straight up being rude. But I just say that because, you know, we have enough of that kind of in society already. But I will say on the brighter things of that, without the negative and ugly, we would never really truly know what progress and beauty would look like. So it happens, but, you know, try to refrain from it as much as possible. Just be kind. As we move forward with transparency on a more personal level, I know that before I had talked about how I couldn't be really honest and open with myself or like other people. And that's just, you know, in terms of me bottling up my emotions and my feelings. I recognize how unhealthy that was, not only for me, but for other people as well. Because, you know, one small thing could really like trigger all of those bottled emotions, and it would just like come out and explode onto other people, and I'd say like mean and hateful things, not only to them but to myself. And so as I started to recognize how unhealthy that was, I started to try to become more transparent with myself and with others, and in doing so I was able to strengthen my relationships with those other people, but especially within myself. I will be honest, because I'm not gonna try and paint myself as like this clear glass window pane where you can like see right through it. No, there's definitely parts of me that I will always hold closely to myself and just those who mean a lot to me. So, I'll have a film of maybe a little bit of dirt on this window, on this hypothetical window, so that only a few are allowed to have the Windex and the cloth to clean off and really see beneath that film. So, as I will always try my hardest to be honest, real, and vulnerable with you guys, there is going to be that one part of me that saves certain things about myself for certain people. And I just say that because I think that's my way of like communicating love on a more intimate level, whether it be with like a family member, a friend, or like a significant other. Like when I mean by intimate, it's just like a more personal level, not so much like what you guys might be thinking as intimate, but that's just how I see that small film, but on this glass window pane that I'm hypothetically painting out. And maybe some of you right now who are listening can agree and are like, yeah, like I do the same thing. Like I don't fully just like throw myself out there for everyone to know. Like it takes time, or there's certain people who just fully know me, or there's some that are just like, I want to know your deepest, darkest secrets, like let me know. And I'm like, I'm actually pretty open to talking about that. So like, I'll tell you about my fears and secrets. Like maybe they're the same as yours. But when it comes to love, I just think that's something that is very special and very beautiful that I don't necessarily just share with anyone. So moving forward though, with transparency, I do have that part that I hold off, which is like 5%, but the other 95%, if you've ever had a question about me, or you have a question for me, then I will, once again, 95% of the time answer those questions. And so that's what I had decided to do, to kind of incorporate how I can be transparent with you guys. So I had taken to my personal Instagram just like ask me a question, and I had people ask me anything that they wanted to know. And for me, it kind of took a different turn than what I had originally thought it was going to be. I really thought people were going to ask like pretty surface level questions, things like, what's your favorite color, which obviously if you can't tell, it's purple. Or random questions like what's your favorite time of the day. So that was my thought process going into this episode, going into asking people having people ask me questions. However, when I did look at the responses, a lot of the questions people had asked were much more deeper than what I was expecting. Not like super deep, but they just required more sincere thoughts and more detail with it. So I thought that was actually kind of cool, just because I think it's pretty telling of the people that surround me, the people who listen to my podcast, and kind of like a reflection of myself, because I have mentioned this previously, but I mean, I enjoy surface level conversations. I can have them, we can talk, but for me, I completely love and cherish those conversations that are just deeper and much more meaningful. I think that there's a true beauty when you get to see a certain side of a person, and what's even more beautiful is when they allow you to see that. So and you can just get so much more from it, and you get to learn a lot about that person. So like I said, I could have these conversations, but the deeper ones are my cup of tea, let's just say. But without further ado, let's just get into these questions. If you do see me referring to my iPad, it's just because it has my notes on it. I don't want to get lost with our conversation because, my thoughts can go everywhere. I can go off on a tangent, and then next thing you know, the point that I'm trying to get across is just gone and it's lost. And then I'm confused. You're probably confused. And then we're kind of just like sitting here lost. But really, if you're not a lost person in this world, like, are you actually living? But anyways, so the first question, a friend of mine had asked, you talk a lot about self-care. What else do you plan on doing with your podcast? So as you can see over to my right, I have an empty chair. But I am looking forward to filling that chair with guests and having people come on and, talk about some life experiences that they have gone through, something that maybe they find others can relate to. And I think that was like really my main purpose with this podcast is for us to embrace our individuality while exercising empathy. And for me, I just understand that I haven't really experienced a lot of things in life compared to some other people. And so I can't really be of help when I don't necessarily understand some things that people have gone through. But for those who are open to sharing part of their story and their truth with others may help someone who may be going through the same thing or something similar. It can help them feel a little less alone in this world. And so, while they are embracing, their individuality while sharing a part of their journey, you and I are allowed to exercise that empathy and try to understand maybe where they are coming from. I also think it's a really good visualization of how to have healthy conversations around tough topics. I think sometimes we just don't have enough of that, or it's not as sincere as we want it to be. It's more like interrogating. And so I think it's just about creating that environment that is comfortable enough for someone to be able to tell their truth and to really own their story. And I also think when you're just able to talk about your emotions out loud, it can become a form of self-care. And I think that's obviously kind of like just what like therapists and counselors are here for, but we sometimes put a negative connotation around that, and I think we should stop doing that because it is healthy to talk about your emotions instead of, constantly trying to figure everything out on your own. It's okay to ask for help because, we don't necessarily understand, or there's some things that we just wouldn't know how to go about. So, don't ever hesitate to reach out for help and to look for those services. But yeah, so that's my plans moving forward with this podcast. The next question that I had, it was kind of like two similar questions, but really they had just asked, what's your biggest motivator to continue moving forward in life right now? I think this is a really good one because there are often times in life where we are thrown like an obstacle and we're not really sure how to get over it or how to overcome it, and it makes it really hard to want to keep moving forward. And it's very different from person to person as far as their motivations. But I think for me, it's because I'm constantly searching for maybe just like my purpose and my why. I don't think I necessarily know what that is, but I just know that if I stay really aligned and true to myself, that I can potentially find that. And so sometimes I think my motivation comes from within, which is hard though, because there are times where you can't always rely on yourself, and that has definitely happened for me. So I would say like the second motivation for me, or like motivator, is the other people around me, like my family and my friends, especially the ones who see my purpose more than I do, and they're just able to help, support me and guide me towards that when I can't do that for myself. So I would say like those few people that I can entrust just like my problems or my issues with are the ones that help motivate me to also keep going. And sometimes it's not even for me looking for the answers within them. It's just really having an ear, having someone to just listen and, hear what I have to say. Because for me, at least, when I do talk things out loud, I start to also find the answers to get over this obstacle. So sometimes it's not even about having their advice more than it is just them listening. And so I just want to give you all a shout out for those of you who are my supporter, who are my backbone when my back feel broke. So I love you guys, and I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done and helped motivate me in the times that I don't. And for those of you who are listening or who are watching and maybe you're trying to think of people who are in your circle that can do that for you, I would say it's hard because it has to deal with a lot of trust and a lot of like vulnerability. But when you're able to find that group, really keep them close to you. And I think it's just healthy to have a support group to help you and to try to make you feel understood. So, maybe within this new year, you start thinking about the people you want to surround yourself with, and if they're able to really help you, or if you're able to rely on them and maybe they can rely on you. So that's just something to think about. But those are definitely my just main motivators is myself and a higher power, definitely, and my family, friends, and those I try to surround myself with. And also this podcast as well, because I just have this feeling within myself that something's gonna come from it. I'm not really sure what, but if all else fails, it's definitely a learning experience. So moving on, someone had asked, what is maturity and what do you feel an individual has to do to become mature? The way that I look at it, I don't think there's steps into becoming mature. I think you learn a lot through your experiences. I do know that a lot of people base age off of maturity level, just because someone who's older may experience more things than someone who's younger. But sometimes I think about what about those who have experienced a lot more at 17 than this person who's 35. So I think it's hard to really define how to reach maturity or to get there. But for me, when I think of someone who's mature, I think of someone who's emotionally mature. And the way that I look at that is just they're able to reflect on the experiences that had happened to them, and they're either able to learn and grow from them, or on the other side of things, they just stay stagnant. And I think there's more power to a person when they take these negative and these bad things that have happened to them and kind of turn it and flip it into something beautiful. I think there's a power within that, because it's really hard to do that, and it's really easy to just go down a more negative approach to the things that have happened to you. So I would say that's, in a sense, what I would define a person as mature, especially if they can take ownership of their wrongdoings. It's really hard to do that because obviously pride gets in the way, but if you are mature enough to drop your pride and to know that you had made a mistake but you're trying to be better, I think that can help lead to maturity, or a more mature mindset. So I decided to put this one in there because it's not as deep, but that's okay. And I think it also breaks up the seriousness of some of the questions. But someone had asked me what my favorite soccer club was. And for me, I'll support anything Seattle. So Seattle Reign, Seattle Sounders, just because I'm from Washington. But I am more of a player supporter. So for an example, Neymar, I love him. He played for Barca for some time, and then he went to PSG, so my club switched from there. Tobin Heath, I think she's such a baller, but she went from the Portland Thorns, and I think she's now over in England playing for Man U, but also in the NWSL, she's now playing for Louisville. So just wherever the player goes is more of the club that I support, just because I support that individual. So I would say that's my favorite club, but it's more my favorite players. Now, this next question was actually really interesting. It made me think a lot too. But someone had asked me, if you could sit down with your younger self, what would you say? So if I were to talk to my younger self today, I would definitely tell her to just be more open-minded, less judgmental, and just to really give people the benefit of the doubt. And, you know, I'm always the type of person that's like, you know, everything happens for a reason. So you go through these experiences to learn something about yourself. And, you know, hadn't I gone through that, I wouldn't be the person I am today. But, you know, going back in time, I would tell myself that, just because I think I was definitely the type that would say, you know, I'm an open-minded person, or I'm not judgmental and I do care. But I think it was more talk than it was ever really like action, because the actual doing part was more difficult than just saying it. So I would say to my younger self, really act on the things that you say, because it's a lot harder to do some of these things than to obviously say it. It's one of the action speaks louder than words. But, you know, eventually I'm glad, because I did learn. I'm still in the process of learning to become more optimistic, how to, you know, be less judgmental, and how to really just like be kind. That's really like the basis of what this podcast is off, but I think it's just a constant learning cycle. You learn a lot more things about yourself as you continue to grow. So I definitely say I'm more optimistic than I was before, but it's still something you have to practice every day. So that's what I would say to my younger self, little Bianca. All right, so this next question came from someone I went to high school with, and they had talked about something that happened at our high school. So they had asked, do you think certain events at MP cause you/us to grow up faster? So for those of you who aren't locals to like the Marysville area, a few years back in like 2014, I'm pretty sure, there was a school shooting at my high school, and it was very traumatic for a lot of people, especially those who are close to the victims or family of the victims. That's something you can't really ever forget. But the thing that I would say, you know, the thing that I had learned from that to, I guess, allow me to grow up a little bit faster was the fact of broadening my mindset. And by that, I just mean you don't think about things like that really happening like ever to like where you're from. And when it does actually happen, it's kind of, you just don't really know how to deal with it or how to handle it. And I just think that for me, it was a moment of recognizing that there are a lot of things outside of our small town that we have to consider, and we just can't look at life through this lens from which we grew up within this small town. You know, we all like went to elementary school together all the way up to high school, and so everyone knew of each other. But you would think, being in a small, tight-knit community, we'd be there for one another. And, you know, after the aftermath, you know, there was a lot of community support, but I think there's always like the wonder of like what, you know, the what ifs. I think that always happens. But I would say the biggest thing that I took from it, and like I guess I grew from, was just, you know, to not think so narrow-mindedly and to really look beyond just our small town, because there's so much that happens in this world that we can't just be so confined to our bubble, and we have to be considerate of what else is going on. So I would say that's like one of the things that had helped me grow, was just the expansion of like my mindset and things that actually happen in this world. Okay, so this next one, it's a little funny one, but one of my cousins, and for those of you who know me, I have like a bunch, but one of my cousins had asked me, who is your favorite cousin? Wow. Since posting the question on my Instagram, there's been like a running joke of like, you're still in the running to becoming Bianca's favorite cousin, or if they do something like that like offends me or something, it's like, you're no longer in the running to becoming Bianca's favorite cousin. Please exit the facility, and please pack your bags and leave the facility immediately, even though the facility is like their home. But my answer to that, drum roll, I don't have a favorite cousin, just because I think they all bring individual personalities to our family that just makes our family who we are. And so it's like I couldn't really pick and choose from one, because it's like you all bring something that's different into my life. And so I wouldn't trade any of that for the world or try to force that into one person. So, but if you are watching, Mikhail, if you can see my on-air sign, he had made that. So, but speaking of my cousins, this one's cool because someone had asked me one of my all-time favorite memories growing up and then my most recent one. So I would say one of my all-time favorite memories growing up was living in my grandparents' house with all of my cousins. I had talked about this in a previous episode, but there was 4 families living under my grandparents' house when I was, I don't know, like 4 maybe. I might have been a little older, but you know, thinking about that now and thinking about 4 families under a 4-bedroom household, I'm like, what the heck? But when we were younger, none of us knew any better. Like all we knew was that we just had our best friends down the hall, and you know, we'd be little rascals getting into trouble every now and then. Someone, especially the younger ones, if they got hurt, we would always try to like hush them up because we're like, oh, like don't say anything, like auntie's gonna get mad, or you know, we don't want to get in trouble and things like that. There was a few hospital runs, but you know, everyone was okay. We all turned out pretty good. So I would say that is my, you know, my all-time favorite memories actually, just growing up, because you know, we still talk about it to this day. And I think it was just a time that life was just very simple, and we just lived life carefree. And it's something, you know, sometimes I take for granted because I recognize that some people aren't very close to their cousins, and the fact that mine are like other siblings to me is just something I'll always cherish and be very grateful for. But my most recent favorite memory, I would say putting all of this together, because this took some time and a lot of like energy, a lot of, you know, YouTube tutorials about how to do certain things. It was definitely a little frustrating, but when I was finally able to see all of it just come into fruition and, you know, all of this hard work, I was just like, I don't know, I just had a very big smile on my face, because it's like, you know, this is actually happening. Like, for those of you who follow my Instagram would have seen that or actually in the beginning of this video, I made a drawing and then it like came to life. And so I think that's my most recent favorite memory, just because it's really fresh in my mind, and I think things kind of started setting in for me when I saw this whole thing just like come together. So yeah. Okay, so for the last question of today, I left it as the last question because I think there's a lot of transparency that's about to come out when I answer this question. But someone had asked me the biggest thing that I had learned in 2020. So this question in particular required a lot of reflection, because obviously 2020 was a year of a lot of ups and downs, more downs than ups. But for me, what my biggest takeaway from 2020, and it was something that I felt going into 2021, was to embrace the unexpected. And the reason I had brought that up in 2021 was because when we were going into this new year, I had this feeling of like uncertainty about like what's gonna happen. And I think that's because of what happened last year. And, you know, there were many events that had taken place where, you know, we probably could have prevented a lot of it, but the matter of them coming up, I think, is a way for us to recognize that there needs to be progressive change because these events had happened. And so, you know, the events can consist of the pandemic, the nationwide protests for BLM, the division within our country because of the presidential election. Obviously, a little bit of that has spilled over into 2021, but the reason I say to embrace the unexpected is because there was a lot to learn from 2020. People had lost their jobs, people had lost their homes, and sadly, a lot of people had lost their lives. And if it really takes that much for us to recognize that the things we were doing prior wasn't working, I feel that these events may really put that into realization. Why couldn't we control this pandemic? Why is there such a division within our country, and what has caused that? And the reason I saved this question for the last part was because it does involve a little bit of transparency. And if you think about it, it's just about that open line of communication between the higher ups and the people, I guess you could say. And this doesn't only date to like last year and the things that happened there, but this dates all the way throughout history. You think about the history that the states were found on, or the Americas were found on, and there's a lot of missing holes. There's a lot of lies and deceit. And the sad thing about that is, within our educational institutions, the history that is being taught is so one-sided of what had actually happened that sometimes people just mold their interpretation of our history around that. And it takes a lot, because sometimes you just have to go seek that other side of the story if your institution doesn't bring that. And for me, I was fortunate enough to continue my higher education, and that's where the holes and the gaps and my curiosity of our history had started to fall into place, because I had taken a class on it. And it's crazy to see why there are so many holes, and those holes are because of people being oppressed, of people feeling that what they have to say doesn't matter, so they will just toss or have any evidence or just their stories and their truth just like destroyed and not even part of history, because they had felt it didn't matter, or other people had just taken their opportunity to say something away from them. And once again, that just comes with transparency. Like, why is it so hard for the people to trust, those who are in power? It's just because that open line of communication isn't there. And I mean, definitely social media has a play in this, and just the media in general, of mixing things that people have to say and pitting certain people against one another. And it like sucks, because it's like, I see why people are doing this. It's to, for entertainment, or it's for, persuasion, and it's for business, and there's just so much, and it's really sad that that's happening. But one thing I think we should see the beauty that comes from this, these unexpected events, is that there are a lot of people now who are fighting for actual change, because they're fed up. They're fed up with everything that has gone on. There needs to be a change, and in order for there to be a change, we have to first acknowledge the need for one. And for us to acknowledge it, we have to really understand why the change is needed. And for us to even understand the change, we have to educate ourselves, and we have to educate one another. And in order to really educate ourselves and one another, we also must hold ourselves accountable. Hold me accountable, hold you accountable, hold your neighbor accountable for, helping them understand why there needs to be a change. And yes, it's hard to try and, change people's minds, especially because, like I had said in the very beginning, people will always have their opinions. They are entitled to their opinions. And like I had said, there's going to be sometimes a defense that comes up when you force an opinion on someone. But it's like these events had happened because what was happening before wasn't working. And so it's now about, how can we really make a difference? How can we progressively change the future for the better, for not only ourselves, for the generations that lie ahead? How can we do that? And, I'm not saying transparency is going to fix everything, but I'm just saying at least having those open lines of communication can factor in and also help. And so for those of you who, want to ignore the unexpected events that had happened, I guess continue to ignore it. But the reason it's happening is because there is a clear push for change to happen with these events. So embrace it, because when we do embrace the unexpected, there is so much growth that can come from it, so much learning that can come from it. And if we really allow ourselves to fully educate ourselves and to be open to have those hold us accountable and hold ourselves accountable, will we be able to understand the beauty and the possibilities that can come from this? My intention for this episode was to continue help build the relationship between me and you, and for you to all get to know me a little bit better. Now, I know they weren't questions that really were about me, like little things, I guess, like, how old are you and all that stuff. But I'm hoping at least that my answers to these questions, or the questions that were being asked, give you a little bit of an insight as far as who I am as a person and my intention as far as this podcast. Overall, transparency can just be a scary thing, because in reality, you don't ever really want to let people see through your window pane. And I get that sometimes we let the negativity and the bad things that have happened to us build a film over that window. And it just is hard for other people to see your intentions. But the thing about that is, transparency does require a lot of honesty, a lot of truth, and a lot of vulnerability. And in order for you to be transparent with other people, you have to be transparent with yourself first. So, with that being said, if you have the Windex and the cloth in your hand, you really have the ability to be the one who can be transparent with others, and most importantly, with yourself. Because if you can be open and honest with yourself, then you can hold yourself accountable. And if you can hold yourself accountable, you can hold others accountable. And if you're holding them accountable, you can help educate them. And if you can help educate them, you can help them understand. And if you can help them understand, you can help them acknowledge that there is a change that needs to happen. This concludes yet another episode of Are You Alone? Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. This is exciting because it's my first video episode, so give me some feedback. Very open to it. But thank you so much for just your constant love and your support. You can keep up with Are You Alone on Facebook at the Are You Alone follow page, or on Instagram at the AYA_podcast. Make sure you go like, follow, and subscribe, especially to this, because I guess that's what helps. But yeah, please make sure to subscribe. I've heard other YouTubers be like, turn your post notifications on. I don't consider myself a YouTuber, but if you want to, turn your post notifications on. But other than that, my name is Bianca, and as we continue our journey, all I ask is that you do your best to achieve life on natural euphoria. Bye.